This is Dr. Deepak Chopra, and welcome to our series on Yoga for Enlightenment. I'm here with Eddie Stern, um, great teacher, guide, mentor, yogi. And we are continuing our series, and actually, we are discussing what is referred to in the third chapter of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali as the attainments of Vibhutis, otherwise also known sometimes as Sutras, sometimes referred to as supernormal abilities, on and on. And these are part of classic teachings from Patanjali in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and can be found in any book, uh, any reliable book on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Right now, I happen to have in front of me the one by Desikacharya. I had a yoga teacher who was a disciple of Desikacharya long time ago. And it's a beautiful chapter as usual, and he was a great teacher. So let's talk a little bit about Vibhutis Siddhis. As I said, they're referred to as attainments. Sutras are for higher states of consciousness, but also referred to as Vibhutis, which are siddhis, attainments. And the idea behind these practices, including the sutras, which are really the basis of the actual practice of the vibhutis. We teach them at, by the way, Seduction of Spirit. So you've been to some of those courses. I'm not sure. Have you been to Seduction of Spirit? But we have a whole week where we just teach the siddhis selectively. The ones on friendliness, on things like, the sun, moon, stars, and bronchial tube, and strength of an elephant. We actually teach the practice as originally taught to me by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So the way it's been described, and I'm just summarizing for our audience, is when we have samyama or sanyama, which is the combination of dharana, which is focused awareness, and then dhyan, which is the flow of meditation with that focused awareness, and samadhi, which is transcendence. When all three come together, then whatever the object of attention is, or intention, whatever the object, it could be a thing, it could be an idea, it could be any object, whatever it is, when the observer, the process of observation, and that which is being observed on the screen of consciousness. So, what is observed on the screen of consciousness? Sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, thoughts. In other words, the totality of experience. Totality of experience is just that: sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts. And when I say sensations, I mean all the five senses. This is the totality of experience. If anyone can tell me anything outside this, I'd be curious. But there is no experience outside this. Sensations, sense perceptions, images, things that we imagine, feelings, emotions, and then thoughts. All of that is one entangled phenomenon in what I'd like to call today the cave of the conditioned mind. So, I was thinking of the cave of the conditioned mind based on Plato's allegory, the shadows. Because Plato said we never see the truth. We only see the shadows of the truth, in a sense implying fragmented, ephemeral shadows of reality. Ephemeral, transient, ungraspable shadows of reality. That's Plato's cave. Here are these prisoners in the Plato's cave. They are frozen. They can't be moved. They're strapped. Behind them is the light of, let's call it, awareness. And it's going through these characters, projecting something on the screen, fragmented images on the screen. And we call that reality, even though It's not reality, it's the shadow play of reality. It's the Maya of reality, it's the illusion of reality. It's the Leela, the play of reality. Reality itself is the light of awareness. And light of awareness is modifying itself as sensations. It modifies itself. Awareness knows itself as sensation, sense perceptions, images, feelings, thoughts. Some of all experience. Thoughts means everything from insight to creativity to inspiration to every mental activity. That's the fragmented shadow mind, which is the same as the brain, because the brain and the mind are correlated activities. You can't have an activity in the mind which is not in the brain. So neither the mind nor the brain are reality. They're both illusions, but they are entangled and they are what we say complementarities. Mind and brain are complementarities. Actually, mind and body are complementarities. But right now, just say mind and brain, and we can substitute body, matter, brain all as the same, because brain is physical matter, body is physical matter, and the world is physical matter. But we now know it isn't. It's a perception. And that perception that you and I have is a uniquely human perception. And we call that modified perception the physical world. But actually, it's a shadow play of the fragmented mind. And it's not reality, it's Maya, it's Leela, it's illusion, it's the virtual reality, it's shadows. It doesn't matter what we call it, but it's the projection. So think of this as the cave of the fragmented mind. Now, I'm going to be a little loose about this, Eddie, because I try to go a little beyond the edges of classical teaching. Let's call this the cave of the fragmented mind, which also has the brain, but the brain is the mind, and the mind is the brain. That they're complementary aspects of the play of consciousness in the shadow world here. Over here, I would say, is Bindu, okay, the pointless, structureless entry of the light of awareness. And here is the Bindi, the screen, where these shadows are being projected. And we call this the physical world and the physical body. So with the Vibhutis and the attainments, all we're doing is actually, first, we're playing with the shadow world of sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, mind. Let's call this the alchemy of experience. We're changing our experience of the world from local to non-local with the Vibhutis. But we're also getting a clue into fundamental reality, because what is changing that, what is creating that alchemy of experience is the light of awareness coming through the Bindu into the cave, playing there with the creation of Leela and Maya, illusion, understanding that this is actually Leela and Maya, and through that understanding, accessing the Bindu, which is both the entry and the exit, if I may say, to the world of illusion from the fragmented mind. And the goal is then to go beyond the fragmented mind into the light of pure awareness. And from there, play with the fragmented mind and its experiences, sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts to see the miraculous nature of experience, because what we call the physical world is an experience. And if you just substitute the word object with the word experience, then you don't have to worry about what is real and what is unreal. You use, as the Vedantists do, they use those words too. So the Germans, they have different words for reality, for perceived reality, fundamental reality. These days, science has different words: perceived reality, fundamental reality, spin, charge, mass, and all that. So everybody now uses these words. What is perceived reality? What is fundamental reality? Everybody. Nobody argues about that. But only Patanjali gives us the way where the perceived reality, the perceiver, and the mode of perception all become one. And then you realize that you, as pure consciousness, as a conscious agent, are, in fact, the alchemist that's playing with modified forms of awareness. Awareness as sensation, awareness as perception, awareness as feeling, awareness as image, and then finally awareness as thought. And this is the alchemy of this, which we do with these attainments, with these practices. And that involves, as you say in your notes to me today, that involves samyama, dharana, dhyan, samadhi. It involves a practice and it involves the sutra. So we have in the literature, all the literature, all the instructions on samyama and also the sutras, but we never actually are given the practice. Now I've realized that after my time with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, I realized that the practice was always an initiation into the sutras. And now I'm sharing what that initiation was. And that initiation was everything that we are discussing, but the actual practice was we used to meditate using the mantra, primordial sound, Bij mantra, get to as close as you can get to samadhi, okay? As close, because samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi, can take you a lifetime. So what we used to do is practice the mantra and then get very close to a silent mind, assuming that we are now in samadhi, and then introduce the sutra, okay? And the sutra was introduced in the gap between thought. And the gap between thought is, of course, the same as the gap between any gaps. Thought, sensation, image, feeling, perception are all entangled. So the gap between thought is also the gap between perception. So if I perceive this and I perceive this gap is the same gap as the gap between thought, this gap. So the space in which we are, the Chitakash we are, is actually also where consciousness resides, unmanifest. And even though this space appears large, the space between me and the Milky Way galaxy appears large. The space between me and you is now the computer. It's actually perceptual space. So it's this, there's no large or small. It's just there in between. It's in the pratyahara, as you told me. Okay, so in the pratyahara is the sutra planted. As soon as you see the respiration coming almost to a stop, the breath almost to a stop, you throw in the sutra like a little pebble in a still pond. And then you leave it, you withdraw. And then periodically you keep throwing in the sutra in that state of awareness, silent awareness, till you perfect that sutra, and then you and the object become one. And we started with very simple things like friendliness, okay, subdued hunger and thirst, or we did go into the five senses, transcending sound, transcending sight, transcending hearing, transcending. But the practice itself was that mantra for transcendence, dharana, the object of existence. We didn't call it, forget reality, unreality. Anything that appears on the screen of consciousness, whether it's a thought, a feeling, an image, is also objective reality, or so-called projected reality. So the scenery is everything. Mind, body, and the universe are all on the scenery side. And if you break them down, they are sensations, perceptions, images, feelings, and thoughts, which are modified forms of awareness. So the practice became very simple. Mantra practice, stillness, watching the breath once in a while. As soon as the breath quietened to a place where it was almost non-existence, sutra. And then wait a little bit of time, stay in that state, sutra, same sutra, till you actually started seeing the manifestation of the sutra. And it was amazing. We all had these experiences, including lifting off the ground. We practiced the flying sutra, we lifted off the ground. And then as soon as we became aware, that we had lifted off the ground, we would fall back. And some people would have injuries. But we had people lifting off the ground who were paralyzed, who had quadriparesis, lying there and lifting off the ground with sutras. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of anxiety. Performance is why is she lifting off and I'm not lifting off? I'm 70 pounds. That person is 300 pounds. They're lifting off. That person feels invisible. I don't. So we stopped teaching this. But now that we have the science and we are looking at the science very carefully, I think with the proper understanding of the Vibhutis, it is going to be possible to see the manifestation of these in real time. Now, Maharishi used to say, though, that unless the collective consciousness thaws a little bit, because right now the collective consciousness is so rigidly frozen in the materialistic physicalist ontology that it acts as an impediment. It's the resistance to the full manifestation of the sutras. But once we get there, critical mass, then you'll see more and more of these happenings. And what he would also say, replace every karmic thought with sanyama. So that sanyama becomes not something you do in meditation or yoga practice, it's life. Every thought is a sanyama. And that's how you get liberated from the karmic body, because the karmic body is nothing other than old recycled stories in the Maya. All of them are in the Maya. They're all magical lies. So once we go beyond the magical lies, replace karmic conversation with sankalpa, dharna, dhyan, samadhi, kriya, then we are all set on the road to freedom. So that is a summary of where we are today in our discussion. You may have some comments on what I've said or some revisions, or you may not like the idea of Bindu, etc. I'd like to know your take on this interpretation, which is becoming very clear to me as I read the various versions of Patanjali, do my own practice, which I've never dropped. I still do all the Vibhuti practices of myself every day, as part of my journey. So sorry for the long introduction, but I thought we should at some point introduce it in detail.
No, I think that was a wonderful introduction, and a lot of important points were covered. I have, of course, no revisions to make whatsoever. Maybe I'll add in a few things to support what you've said. Just a couple. Number one, the Yoga Sutra, the entire sutra form is a particular type of literature in the Hindu tradition and the yogic tradition. There are different types of literatures, and sutra is one, where there are very short phrases, a few words strung together. Sometimes they don't even have a verb, that has a very concise, irrefutable statement. And it's it's all very logical. I'm looking for the word. It'll come to me in a minute. This is the idea about a sutra, that the form of it itself is completely incontrovertible, but that you can't understand it necessarily alone without commentary or without instruction into it. So you have the Yoga Sutras, and then you have Vyasa's commentary that we've been referring to, that goes along with it to explain the sutras, because sometimes there's just a couple of words and it doesn't make sense as a translation. So, and nowhere in Yoga Sutra are practices taught. Like you've said, they're only described. So you have the idea of ahimsa, pratishtayam, tatsanidao vairatyagaha. So ahimsa is given as one of the things that we should be observing as a vrata or embodying as a transformation of consciousness. And Patanjali doesn't tell us how to practice ahimsa. He says that when you're established in it, anyone who comes in your presence, if they're hostile to each other, they will renounce their hostilities in your presence, because you will be the living embodiment reflection of non-harm. And so we see what the outcome is, but we're not told how to do it. He doesn't say be a vegetarian or speak nice words or anything, but the commentaries might fill it in, and more specifically, a teacher will tell us what we should be following in order to do that. So when we get to the Vibhutis, and also with asana as well, there are 3 very important sutras on asana. Some people say, oh, because Patanjali only spoke of asana in 3 sutras, they're not an important part of yoga. But he only gave 3 sutras to pranayama. He only gave a couple of sutras to ahimsa. So it's a nonsensical statement. But what he said describes the way that every single asana can be done and the result of them, which is number 1, an asana should be easily entered into and stable. And number 2, there should be a relaxed effort. Your awareness should be focused on the infinite. And when you are established in that asana, a transcendence of the pairs of opposites, of the ups and downs of life. And that's how you know if your asana is secure. So this applies to any asana, but he doesn't say, do Virabhadrasana, do Shirashasana. That comes in the commentary. So now we get to the Vibhutis, and we hear things like, by focusing on the bronchial tubes, you can transcend hunger and thirst. Or by focusing on the Kurmanadi, you can obtain steadiness. Or by focusing on doing samyama on the difference between your body and space, you can move through space like cotton wool. But he never tells us how to do it. And so this is a key point where people get frustrated with Yoga Sutra because they think, well, this should be an instruction book. Like if I buy a stereo and it tells me what chords to plug in to make it work, and then I can listen to stuff, that's what I'm expecting. But Yoga Sutra is not like that. We need commentary. We need teachers to fill in the gaps like you were just explaining. So that's a very important point when we look at these things. And then another thing is this idea of in Sankhya, there's a really beautiful idea at the culmination where Prakriti, which is nature, is viewed in the feminine form. And that Prakriti is said to be likened to a dancer or a performance artist who comes on the stage and performs her craft. And as the artist, she wants to be seen and observed. And when Prakriti has been seen and feels that she's been seen and experienced, then she disappears from the stage satisfied and goes back into the infinite potentiality of all creation. So that when consciousness observes Prakriti and the infinite manifestation of Prakriti, and she feels that she's been seen and observed, then she goes back into the equilibrium, maybe to emerge later in a different form. So this is similar, but not exactly like the play of Maya. And it's similar to what you were describing about how from the infinite consciousness, which is symbolized as Bindu, the point, which has no location, then manifests itself in a myriad of ways, infinite ways, onto the screen. And when we see the things that are on the screen and we experience them and observe them, then they can resolve themselves. But it's similar to like if we have something unresolved in ourselves and we never look at it, it always is a problem until we look at it. And when we look at our trauma or we look at our hurt, we look at the things where we feel we've been wronged, when we look at those things, then those hurts inside of us, they feel like they've been seen, and then we can deal with them, and then they can resolve themselves, and they're no longer an obstacle or a stumbling block for our happiness or for us living fulfilled, productive lives. So things that exist need to be seen, and if they're not seen, then it causes a problem. So this idea of seeing is very key to the entire project of yoga, because all objects, like you said, this is an object and this is an object and my pencil is an object. It exists for 2 purposes, for experience and for liberation. That's what Yoga Sutra says. That's what Patanjali says. Every object exists for the sole purpose of experience and liberation. And we use experience as part of the journey towards liberation. And every object, to sum up, every object has something inherent within it, which is the purpose of that object. And that is how Patanjali in particular defines Dharma. Not everyone defines Dharma that way. Dharma is religion, it's ritual, it's purpose in life, it's duty, it's all of these things. But in Patanjali, it's the inherent characteristic of any object. And the inherent characteristic of any object is the experience of it. And when the experience of that object is the only thing that exists within you, you take on the inherent characteristic and become it. And that is the expression of a vibhuti. But as you said, if you're levitating and you think, oh, I'm levitating, you're going to come crashing right back down, because what a vibhuti cannot abide by is someone who thinks that they're the one who's doing that vibhuti. So there has to be an absence of ahamkara, of I-ness. And when that is gone, then the vibhuti can manifest itself.
Okay,
so that's all I have to say on that.
Very clear, very clear. I'd just like to add to that anything that we call an object, and book, if we replace the word object with the word experience, and then the word experience with the word perception, and the word perception with the word modification of awareness as that perception, and the word modification of awareness with just pure awareness from where that modification comes, then you can see that the object, the mental activity, the interpretation, and the source of all of that are one phenomenon. And they are unified phenomenon that you and I now have agreed are the reshuffling of what we call the gunas, charge, momentum, and spin.
Yeah.
And that then clarifies ultimately that there are no objects of perception, they're modifications of the self, tattvamasi. Everything is tattvamasi. Everything. It doesn't matter whether this is my earpod container or this book or this hand, it's all tattvamasi. That is it. There is nothing else. And beyond that, it has to be experienced. As you said, you cannot teach somebody how to practice the siddhis or the vibhutis through a description. It has to be transmitted by a teacher. And that's what happened to me and many multitudes that were students of Maharishi. Some of us were given the privilege of also being able to teach this and initiate it. And it's a transmission, but here is the key that most people don't understand. It's not an intellectual exercise at all, okay? In fact, it is a destruction of all intellect. And sankalpa, kriya, dharna, subtle intention are all very intimately related. You know, they're almost variations of the same thing. A subtle intention, sankalpa, kriya practice, implanting the sutra itself in the through pratyahara. You don't need to understand. You know, if you know that here is karma nadi, this is the effect. All you do actually in the practice, without giving it away altogether, because you know it has to be transmitted, but your attention is on the karma nadi, and there's a faint thought of what that vibhuti represents. After that, it's all stillness, it's all samadhi. That's the blossoming of the sutra. So I wanted to say that. And do you have any short comment on that? Because we need to actually go on.
Yeah. My very short comment is that we already read in the beginning of this chapter that the word and its meaning are infinitely they are the same thing. The word and its experience and its meaning are the same thing. So by initiating or suggesting these words, these Sanskrit syllables, into the quiet field of consciousness and meditation, that by letting them sink in there as a pattern, because word, meaning, and experience are all the same thing, that will be the flowering forth of that experience of the vibhuti. So
perfect. There's this nama rupa, name and form, basically. Okay, so now we are on chapter 3, and
Correct.
today we are talking about the sutra number 19 on chapter 3. Is that how it is?
We're at 19, 319.
319's birth.
No. We're not on 19. We are on 18.
which is, no, I thought 18 was language. We did that last time.
18 is the by realization of latent impressions, knowledge of previous birth is acquired.
Okay, I have it as 19, but doesn't matter. Let
Oh,
me,
I might have written it down wrong when I sent you notes. It's
okay,
possible I
doesn't
did.
matter. I have the book in front of me.
Huh.
So let's say 18.
We did sounds last time. We did the meaning of words and sounds overlapping. Yeah. So
Okay,
now we're up to latent impressions, number
okay.
18.
Why don't you give us a commentary on 18?
Okay. So, I mean, this is
Then I will also say a few words.
yeah, for absolutely. So this is a huge topic, of course. The sutra says that by the realization of latent impressions, and this is samskara, that there is a knowledge of previous birth. So we can acquire our knowledge of previous birth by understanding what are the current impressions that we have in the field of our consciousness now. Um, so there is something within the sutra that we have to understand karma, which is action. Then these are the things we do. Then there's the samskara, the impression or the memory that's caused by those actions, and then the vasana, the desire to repeat or not repeat those actions. And to not spend too much time on it. Uh, Samskaras are things which are not bound to our physical body, but they are impressions which exist on the subtle level or on the subtle plane of our body, which means that when our body is finished and used up, our body might decay, but the subtle impression doesn't fade away. If there's an incompleted action with any samskara, then that samskara is then going to take a form later on. So the idea is, so you and I are friends. One day I come visit you and I buy you an ice cream cone, and that's an action. And now because I bought you an ice cream cone, you have a karmic debt to me and you owe me an ice cream cone. But then we go our separate ways. Sadly, we never see each other and we each die old, happy, surrounded by our loved ones. But you owe me an ice cream cone. And there's that. I'm, of course, giving a very simplistic idea of it. And that's a karmic debt between the two of us. So after we die, there's this subtle impression still existing of this karmic debt. And so later on, we will be born into other forms, and then maybe you buy me an ice cream cone or something comparable. Your karmic debt is paid off, and you've untied a knot of your debt. So in the Hindu tradition, the whole concept of karma is based on bondage to action. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to free ourselves from the bondage to action by doing actions without an expectation of any outcome whatsoever. So if we do an action with the expectation of an outcome, then we're bound to future actions. But if we do the action that we have to do for whatever reason, without any expectation, without any desire for a particular outcome, whatever may be, then we're not bound by that action. But that's not how it is for most of us. We do stuff, we want things to happen, we have interactions with people, they're complicated, and stuff builds up. So what we end up being is we end up as the beings that we are, is that we're a bundle of karmic actions that have been unresolved. And in our life, we're being born so we can work out some of these karmic knots, untie some of the bundle. And the and so that's basically the name of the game. So when I die, whatever is left to do, those actions are going to take whatever form they need to in order to continue working themselves out. I'm not Eddie. I'm a bundle of karma, taking the form of Eddie, trying to work stuff out. And that's our job as spiritual practitioners. So if I do the samyama on the subtle impressions, which I can perceive in the field of chitta, I can come to an understanding, or we can all come to an understanding of what were the previous actions that might have led me to be in the circumstance that I am now. And through that, there can be a perception of previous births and previous circumstances that laid the groundwork for me to be in the situation that I am now, and to understand the karmic necessity of how I have to behave and what I still have to work out, so I can free myself from future bondage as well. So how is it possible that we can have a knowledge of previous birth through the samskara, meditation, samyama, and samskara, by understanding what samskaras are. And then it will give us the knowledge. We understand the present condition based on, when we understand the present condition, we can understand the conditions that led us to be in this situation. And so that's one of the commentaries and one of the ways of looking at it. There are a bunch of different ways, but to be brief.
Okay, so this then makes total sense. The way I understand sanskara then is the seed of memory, and it is derived from karma, and it leads to what we call vasana, which is the seed of desire. And so karma, vasana, and sanskara in modern terminology would be the software of the soul. And this software of the soul resides non-locally in the Akashic field, in the matrix of souls, and it recycles as the process that we call birth or reincarnation. But what is recycling is not an individual. What is recycling is the seed for potential future individuals that are the manifestation of previous individuals, who in turn are the manifestation of sanskaras, vasanas, and karma of the previous. The chain of being recycles and the chain of being evolves at the same time. And any thought that I have, actually, any memory that I have, is a sanskara. And every desire that I have is also part of that. And so it's all the same thing. Sanskara, vasana, karma, they're seeds for manifestation. And now we're discussing the third seed, which is the way you explained it. And I'm just reading now from Desikacharya. He says, Sanyama on one's tendencies and habits will lead one to their origins. Consequently, one gains deep knowledge of one's past. So he says exactly what you've just said. We learn how our behavior and personal characteristics developed, what events in the past influenced our attitudes, our likes and dislikes. We learn to what degree they are related to our hereditary, to our tradition, to our social requirements. And when these roots are known, we can re-examine our lifestyle, current lifestyle, as related to our past lifestyle. That's very nice, actually.
Yeah.
So that's where this is, okay? That's where we are today. And if I was actually transmitting this practice in real time, then we would actually be noticing one's tendencies, which also, of course, those tendencies are represented as the combination of the gunas within us, as vata, pitta, kapha, as sattva, rajas, tamas, as creativity, sustenance, and destruction, as Shiva, Shakti, as all the five faces of Shiva: creation, manifestation, sustenance, destruction, incubation, and resurrection. It is to be born again when you practice this particular sutra on tendencies.
Yeah. And as you said also with the gunas, that it says in the commentary that this characteristic of contentment of mind is nothing but a composition of the three gunas, and everything connected with the gunas has been counted as that to be avoided. So it's just patterns. If I can share one quick thing, a friend of mine, Shradhalu Renaud, who is from Pondicherry, we were discussing once patterns, and he's a devotee of Aurobindo and also a physicist. And he said, one of the ways that we look at it in the tradition I come from also is that the infinite has an infinite amount of ways of being self-aware, of knowing itself. And one of the ways that the infinite can be self-aware is through ripples. And so that the ripple of potential creation somehow began to occur in Prakriti. So like somehow a ripple of awareness begins to occur. And you can imagine this ripple is sort of like you said before, like putting in a pebble. If you have a clear pond and you drop a pebble in, it creates ripples, and those ripples are a pattern. And then maybe there's another ripple of awareness over here, another pebble, and that starts to create patterns. And now the patterns are overlapping as the ripples join, like standing wave fields. And as each of these ripples of awareness pattern over each other, they become these standing wave field patterns that then begin to take on form. And so each of these ripples are the gunas that are rippling over each other and forming patterns. And as the patterns become more intricate, the forms become more intricate. And then the gunas ripple into superconscious awareness, and then to cosmic identity, and then into a rippling over with each other to create the tanmatras. And then the tanmatras ripple over each other to form a more solid elements. And then we also have ripples occurring that are creating the capability for perceiving experience through the sense organs, and then acting on that experience through the organs of action. And then a mind is also a pattern of ripples, different types of ripples of awareness to perceive all of the experience that's possible. So everything becomes a pattern, and everything is ripples. And as we undo the patterns, then we understand the source of the awareness. And so everything is a following back of the patterns.
I love that. The patterns are the knots, the
Yeah,
karmic web, which
exactly.
also manifests as the physical body.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
it's the projection. Well, this has
Yeah.
been a very, very wonderful discussion to be continued as we see
Yes.
all these sutras are in fact related to each other. You know, they're all part of the entanglement of experience and the untying of karmic knots for ultimate freedom, moksha, liberation. Thank you, Eddie.